It happened on a Sunday. Not the dramatic kind of Sunday with shouting or doors slamming, just one of those quiet ones that stays with you. The kind where the air feels heavier, like the house knows something before you do. We were having dinner, my wife Mariah, our daughter Ellie, and me. The roast chicken was just out of the oven, her favorite lemon butter with rosemary. Ellie was setting the table, humming the same tune she always does, something from a cartoon. And just as I pulled out my chair, my phone buzzed. Dad. Name flashing on the screen like a warning. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. That wasn't unusual. Growing up, he treated silence like it was a parenting style. Still, something told me to answer. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door creak behind me. Hello, I said, keeping my voice low. He didn't greet me, just jumped straight in. You need to stop pretending that woman is your wife. You know what I think that was a mistake marriage. Should have never happened. You shame the family. I didn't say a word at first. My hands were shaking not out of anger, just something deeper. Something that had been building for years, like water pressing against old wood. You called me? I said finally, soft and slow. You called me to say this. He sighed. No. I called because the bank is sending letters. About the house. I need help. Son. That's when it hit me. He wasn't calling because he missed me, not to ask how Ellie was doing, not even to apologize for what he'd just said. He needed a bailout. Again. I grew up in that house. The front steps are cracked in just the right way, one for each fall. I had learning to ride my bike. Mom painted the kitchen yellow because she said it reminded her of sunflowers. That was before the cancer. Before she left us in the fall of '99. I was 15, and something in Dad just broke after that. He started treating everything like a burden. Me, especially. You remind me of her too much, he said once, eyes foggy from whiskey. I tried. God knows I tried. I made straight A's, got a scholarship, helped him pay the bills, and still never a thank you. Never an, I'm proud of you. Just silence, or criticism, or worse, indifference. So when I met Mariah, kind, soft-spoken, full of faith in people, I clung to her like she was air. My father hated that, said she was beneath me. Her family cleans houses. He'd whispered, like it was some kind of curse. But she loved me. She saw past the scar tissue. She saw me. We got married in a courthouse. Dad didn't show. He sent a check in the mail with the memo line left blank. Back on the porch, I watched the sky shift from blue to orange, listening to him breathe on the other end of the line. You think I'd help you? I said quietly. After what you just called my marriage, I didn't mean. Yes. You did. He went silent. I could picture him in that living room, surrounded by unpaid bills and old photographs that never included Mariah or Ellie. Look, he said finally. It's still your mother's house. I almost laughed. No, I said. It was hers. She's gone. And you've done everything to erase her warmth from that place. You let it rot. Another pause. Then I'm still your father. I nodded to myself, as if that word was supposed to carry weight, as if biology could clean up years of emotional debris. You're right, I said. You are. And I hung up. I walked back into the kitchen, heart pounding. Everything okay? Mariah asked. I looked at her, really looked. Her hair tied up messily, a smudge of flour on her cheek from helping Ellie with cookies earlier. She looked like home. I think it's time we stop trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed, I said. She knew exactly what I meant. We sat down and ate together, laughed at Ellie's joke about the chicken's funny leg, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight slide off my chest, even just a little. The next few weeks were quiet. I didn't call him back, didn't answer when he tried again. He sent a letter, just one page, It said, "Don't let them take the house. You know what it means. To you. To her. Her." He meant Mom. Of course he did. But the thing is, it did mean something to me. Not to him. He'd burned every bridge in that house, and now he wanted me to swim back and carry him across. I remember one night, maybe 2 years after Mom passed, I found him crying in the hallway. First and only time I ever saw that. He held a picture of her in one hand and a bottle of bourbon in the other. "I don't know how to raise you," he'd whispered. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, 14 years old, feeling like the adult in the room. Now, decades later, he wanted me to fix the mess again. But something in me had changed. I wasn't the boy waiting for scraps of love anymore. I went to the bank. I asked about the property. Turns out, he was 3 months from foreclosure. I had the money, could have wired it, could have saved the house. But I didn't. Instead, I took Mariah and Ellie one weekend and drove by the place. Didn't go inside, just parked across the street. Ellie looked at it like it was something out of a fairy tale. "Did you live there, Daddy?" I nodded. "Was it happy?" I paused, then said, "Some parts, sweetheart." And I meant that. She pointed to the porch. "I like the swing," she said. I smiled. "That was your grandma's favorite spot." Mariah put her hand on mine. Soft. Grounding. We drove away, and I let the house go. I don't know if he blames me. He probably does. But sometimes, you have to stop bleeding for someone who cuts you every time you reach out. Have you ever had to choose your peace over your past? I'd really like to hear your story. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments if you feel like sharing. A month passed, maybe 2. The phone stopped ringing, the mailbox got quieter. I didn't expect a thank you, not for not saving the house, but I guess a part of me hoped for something, a final word, a sigh, even an insult. But what I got instead was an envelope. No return address, no fancy seal, just my name, written in that familiar, sharp handwriting, my father's. I opened it at the kitchen table while Mariah was folding laundry and Ellie was drawing mermaids on construction paper beside me. Inside was a photo, an old one, faded, bent at the corners. Me, age 7, wearing a cardboard crown, holding a slice of cake with chocolate all over my face. And next to me, Dad, smiling, really smiling, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. Behind us, the swing, the one on Mom's porch. On the back of the photo, just 5 words. I thought I had time. That was it. No name, no apology, just a sentence wrapped in dust. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed, looking at that photo again under the soft yellow light from my nightstand. Mariah stirred beside me. "Can't sleep?" I nodded. "You thinking about the house?" "Not the house," I said. "The kid in the picture." She sat up and looked at it with me. "I don't even remember that day," I whispered. But he looked happy. We both did. Mariah leaned her head on my shoulder. Maybe he was trying. Maybe he didn't know how. I sighed. Trying doesn't erase what he did later. "No," she said. "But sometimes, the trying is the only part they get right." When the bank finally sold the house, I checked the listing out of curiosity. They'd stripped the porch swing, repainted the kitchen, ripped out the garden Mom planted. The ad said fresh start for new families. And that's what hit hardest. That's what I'd wanted all those years ago. A fresh start. A home that didn't feel like a test I was always failing. There's a box in our garage. I hadn't opened it in years. It held the last pieces of my mother's things, her journals, a scarf that still faintly smelled of lavender, and a dented picture frame. I took it out one afternoon while Ellie was at school. Mariah came out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure. Inside that frame was another picture. Mom, holding me as a baby. Behind her was Dad, hands in his pockets, distant. He looked like a guest in his own family. The glass was cracked. I must have dropped it during the last move. But the image inside still whole? I started journaling that week. Not something I'd done since college, but it helped. Writing down memories, not the big ones, just small flashes, like how he used to whistle while fixing the fence, or how he once bandaged my scraped knee with more care than I'd expected. I didn't do it to forgive him. I did it to remember that I wasn't crazy, that there were moments, that love, however broken, had once flickered. Ellie asked about him one night. We were reading bedtime stories and she closed her book, looked at me with those big brown eyes, Mariah's eyes. "Daddy. Who's your daddy?" I froze. It was a fair question. But how do you explain absence to a child still learning what forever means? "He was someone I learned from," I said carefully. "Was he nice?" I thought about it, then said, "Sometimes." She tilted her head, like when you're tired and forget my bedtime hug. I chuckled. "Yeah, kind of like that." She seemed satisfied with that. Children don't need long stories, just honesty wrapped in safety. Mariah told me something that stuck with me. We were walking through the park, leaves crunching underfoot, her hand in mine. "Sometimes, letting go isn't about anger," she said. "It's about understanding that holding on is heavier." I nodded. And yet, some nights, I still dream about him being proud of me. "That's not weakness," she said. "That's the child inside you, still waiting." That made me tear up, not because I was sad, but because someone saw me, truly saw me. A few weeks after that, I got another letter. Not from Dad. From the new owners of the house. It was handwritten, warm, grateful. They'd found a small tin box hidden under one of the floorboards beneath what used to be Mom's favorite armchair. Inside were letters, old ones, between Mom and Dad, from when they were first dating. They sent them to me, unsure what else to do. I read them slowly over several nights, letters full of dreams, plans, poems he wrote her, and notes from her about baby names and the color she wanted the nursery to be. They were so human, so young. I didn't know whether to cry or smile, because the man who wrote those words, he was not the man who raised me, but maybe, once, he could have been. The last letter was from her, dated 3 months before she passed. It read, "If I go before I can fix what's broken between you and our boy, promise me this, don't let your silence be what he remembers. Say something, even if it's late. Say something real." I stared at that line for a long time. Don't let your silence be what he remembers. And yet, that's all I ever got. But somehow, reading those letters, it softened something. Not a full forgiveness, but maybe a quiet release. Have you ever discovered a side of someone after they were gone? Something that made you question what you thought you knew? If so, I'd love to hear your story. Sometimes, our memories are only half the truth. What would you have done with those letters? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. It was a Saturday morning when Ellie showed me the drawing. She had used her biggest sheet of paper, one of those wide craft pads we keep under the bookshelf. "Look, Daddy," she said, beaming. "It's our family." I knelt down beside her on the rug, still in my old college sweatshirt, coffee warming my hands. There we were, me, Mariah, Ellie in the middle, and beside us, an older man, holding her hand. He had gray hair and a cane. "Who's this?" I asked gently, tapping the fourth figure. "That's your dad," she said casually. like it was the most natural thing in the world. You said he liked porches, so I drew one. I didn't know what to say. We hadn't seen him since before she could talk. I hadn't shown her any recent pictures. And yet, here he was in her imagination, smiling, gentle, a part of us. Why'd you draw him? Ellie shrugged. Because he's part of the story. Right? That sentence. Because he's part of the story. It stayed with me all day, not just because of the childlike innocence of it, but because somehow she was right. I had spent years trying to cut him out of the story, and yet, there he was, in my daughter's drawing, in my wife's patience, in my own silence. I didn't realize I was crying until Mariah touched my cheek, brushing the tear away with her thumb. She sees more than we think, she said. I took the drawing and tucked it into the same box where I'd kept Mom's journals and that dented photo frame. It felt right, like it belonged with the others' pieces of a history I couldn't rewrite, only learn from. That evening, I sat outside by our little porch swing, the one I built after Ellie was born. It creaked just like the old one. I thought about calling him, just to ask something. I wasn't even sure what, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat with the silence, letting it breathe. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. Not the postman, not a delivery. A real knock, slow, unsure. When I opened it, I froze. It was him, my father, leaning heavily on a cane, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was thinner, his coat worn, and in his eyes something I hadn't seen since I was a boy. Uncertainty. We stared at each other for a long moment. He spoke first. I was passing through. I raised an eyebrow. Passing through where he chuckled faintly. Doesn't matter, I suppose. I didn't want the last thing you heard from me to be that phone call. I didn't say anything. I was still processing the fact that he was standing there, unannounced. I won't stay long, he added quickly, almost nervously. Behind me. Mariah peeked from the hallway. She didn't say a word, just gave me a nod, then disappeared back inside with Ellie. I stepped aside. Come in, I said. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked around like he was in a museum. This is a good home, he said quietly. I nodded. It is. He cleared his throat, staring at his hands. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know what I came to say. But I saw the house. It's gone now. I watched them move in. A young couple. I stayed silent. I remembered your mother's laugh, he continued. How she'd hum when she watered the garden. He shook his head, almost to himself. I ruined it. All of it. I looked at him. Really looked. There was no anger in me anymore. No rage or desire to punish. Just sadness. Sadness for the years lost. For the conversations we never had. For the father I wished he'd been. I found the letters, I said. The ones Mom wrote. His eyes filled. Not with tears, but with something heavier, regret. She asked you to speak, before it was too late. He nodded slowly. I know. We sat in silence. Then he said something I never expected. I failed you. And I'm sorry. No justification. No excuses. Just those 5 words. And in that moment, something cracked open. Not between us, but in me. I didn't forgive him. Not entirely. But I believed him. And somehow, that was enough for now. Ellie came into the room holding a cookie. She looked at him, wide-eyed. He smiled gently. You must be Ellie. She nodded, then walked over and held out the cookie. For you, she said. It has raisins. I picked them out. He laughed genuinely. It was the first time I'd heard that sound in decades. Thank you, he said, his voice trembling slightly. She crawled into my lap and whispered, Is he staying? I looked at him, then back at her. Just for a little while, I said, and she smiled. That night, after he'd left, Mariah and I sat on the couch while Ellie slept. Did it help, she asked me. I don't know yet, I replied honestly, but I think it started something. She rested her head on my shoulder. That's more than most get. And she was right. So many people never get the words, never hear the truth, never see the person who hurt them acknowledge it. But I did. Even if it came late, even if it came wrapped in silence and distance. The next morning, I found a note on the porch swing. Thank you for letting me say it. I'll be better. Whatever's left of time, I'll use it. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I still carry wounds, but they don't bleed anymore. They've turned into scars, quiet reminders of who I was and who I chose to become. And that house, it lives on in memory. But this home where Ellie laughs and Mariah bakes cookies and love is spoken aloud. This is where healing lives. Have you ever been surprised by someone's apology? Have you ever had to decide what to do with it? Sometimes, healing doesn't come in the way we expect, but it can still come. What would you say if someone from your past knocked on your door? Share your thoughts with me if you'd like. I'm listening. I didn't expect to see him again so soon, but the following Sunday, just as I finished mowing the lawn, his car pulled into the driveway. It was the same old sedan he'd had for years, paint peeling on the sides, the bumper held together with wire. He stepped out, a little slower this time, holding something wrapped in a brown paper bag. I wiped the sweat off my brow, unsure if this visit would feel like a continuation or a goodbye. He nodded to me, didn't want to come uninvited. You already did, I said, half smiling. He chuckled. That's fair. I gestured toward the porch. Come sit. I'll get us something cold. When I came back with lemonade, he was holding the paper bag in his lap like it was made of glass. I found this in storage, he said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it slowly. It was an old photo album, leather-bound, edges fraying, the kind Mom used to keep. I thought they were all gone, I murmured, brushing dust off the cover. So did I, he replied. But I guess your mother hid this one from me, or maybe from herself. We opened it together, page after page of us birthdays, trips to the lake, her garden in bloom, me in a pirate costume grinning with a wooden sword, and tucked between two pages, a Polaroid I'd never seen before. Me and him, fishing at the lake, my small hand holding a wriggling fish, his hand steadying mine, both of us beaming. I don't remember that, I said, surprised. He looked at it for a long time. I do, he said softly. It was the one time I felt like I was doing something right. He started talking more, then not about guilt, but about moments. How he used to wait outside my school concerts even when he couldn't bring himself to go inside. How he kept the programs and drawings I gave him, stored in an old cigar box under his bed. How he once drove 3 hours to watch my college game, then turned back halfway because he was afraid I'd tell him to leave. I thought I had ruined it beyond fixing. He said, so I just stayed out of the way. I stared at the album. You could have said something. I said, I didn't think I deserved to. Mariah came out with Ellie not long after. Ellie jumped into his lap without hesitation, showing him her latest masterpiece, a unicorn with rainbow wings. This one's magical, she said proudly. He smiled, his old hands trembling slightly as he held the page. I think you're magical, he said. I watched them together, and something changed. Not just in me, in him. Later that evening, as he was leaving, He turned to me on the porch steps. "I'd like to come back next Sunday, if that's all right." I nodded. "That'd be fine." He started walking toward his car, then stopped. "I missed so many Sundays, didn't I?" I nodded again. "But you're here now." And that was all I said. The Sundays became routine. He came with little things, cookies from the bakery, an old puzzle for Ellie, once even a small plant he called Regret's twin because it grew back stronger when it was pruned. He never stayed too long, just enough to sit, share, listen. One day, he asked Mariah if he could help prep dinner. She handed him a cutting board and said, "Only if you like garlic." He grinned. "Your husband never did." Mariah laughed. "He's still learning." So was he. One afternoon, Ellie asked if he could come to her school's grandparents' day. Mariah looked at me. I looked at him. He looked stunned. "I'm not," he started, but I stopped him. "You can be." Ellie clapped her hands. "Yay, you're coming." He didn't cry, but something shimmered behind his eyes as he nodded. "I'll wear a tie." That day, he came early, wore a jacket and tie that looked like it hadn't seen daylight since the Clinton administration. He shook hands with the other grandparents, took pictures beside the bulletin board, watched Ellie perform her little poem about kindness with a look on his face I hadn't seen since childhood. Afterward, he leaned close to me in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me become again." He stayed for dinner that night, and after we tucked Ellie in, he asked if he could speak with Mariah alone. They sat in the kitchen for nearly 30 minutes. I stayed in the living room, pretending to read, but listening to the murmurs of their conversation. Later, when she came back in, her eyes were glassy. "What did he say?" I asked. She sat beside me, held my hand. "He told me he was wrong. About me. About us. About everything." I swallowed hard, and I told him. We already knew. The next Sunday, he didn't come. I waited, but nothing. No knock. No call. I tried to tell myself he forgot. Or maybe he wasn't feeling well. But something told me this silence was different. Monday morning, the hospital called. He had collapsed in his apartment the night before. A stroke. He'd survived, but barely. He wasn't speaking, and he'd listed me as next of kin. Mariah and I packed a bag and drove the 2 hours in near silence. When I saw him lying there, wires, tubes, that once sharp face softened by illness, I didn't feel anger. I felt grief for what we'd barely begun to build. I sat beside him and took his hand. He opened his eyes slowly, tried to speak, but no words came. So I did the talking. "Ellie misses you," I said. "She thinks unicorns brought you to our family." He blinked, slowly, and I think, maybe she's right. He tried to smile, just a twitch. "Rest now," I said. "You're safe." Have you ever felt a second chance slip just out of reach? Have you ever wished you had just a little more time? Sometimes we don't get the ending we imagined, but we still get the story. What would you say to someone if you only had one more hour? If it's not too heavy, feel free to share in the comments. He never fully woke up. Not in the way I hoped. Not with words, or a proper goodbye, or some final truth whispered in the quiet of a hospital room. But he tried. Every time I visited, he'd move his eyes, squeeze my hand just enough for me to know he was still there, somewhere beneath it all. Ellie drew him pictures. Mariah baked his favorite almond cookies and wrapped them in linen, even though he couldn't eat. We kept coming anyway every Sunday, because I didn't want silence to win this time. On our last visit, the nurses told me he'd taken a turn for the worse. They used words like decline and prepare. He lay still, eyes closed, hands pale and cool. I sat beside him, Ellie's drawing tucked into the pocket of his blanket, a crayon version of our whole family, with him in the center. I spoke to him for almost an hour, not with bitterness, but with warmth. I told him about Ellie's spelling test, Mariah's new recipe, the tomatoes in the garden starting to come in early. And then, I told him the truth. I forgive you, I whispered, not because I forgot, but because I wanted to be free. He passed that night, peacefully, they said. And when I arrived at the hospital the next morning, the nurse handed me a small envelope with my name on it. We found it in his drawer. She said, "He must have asked someone to help him write it. We think it was a therapist who came in last week." It wasn't long, barely 5 lines. "I've made more mistakes than I can count. But watching you become a father, it healed a part of me I thought was gone. Tell Ellie she saved an old man. And tell Mariah, she was always right about love." I held it to my chest and wept in the hallway. Not because he was gone, but because I got what so many people never do. An ending that, while imperfect, was true. The funeral was small. We kept it quiet. Just a few people from his building, a neighbor who used to bring him groceries, and us. Ellie wore a blue dress and held a single lily. During the service, she leaned over and whispered, "Can I say something? I was surprised." "Are you sure?" She nodded solemnly. I helped her up to the front. She stood on a small step stool, hands trembling slightly. "My grandpa," she said, "was very quiet, but he listened to me, and he smiled when I drew him things. I think he was learning to be happy again, and that was it. That was everything." After the funeral, we drove by the old house one last time. It looked different now. New paint, fresh flowers in the garden, children's toys on the porch. A new family had made it theirs. Ellie rolled down the window. "I think Grandma would like this," she said. I smiled. "I think so too." Mariah reached for my hand. "You okay?" she asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. Back at home, I placed his photo next to Mom's on our bookshelf. Not out of obligation, but because he had earned it in the end. I looked at the photo Ellie had drawn, still on our fridge. The version of him she'd imagined warm, present, loving. Maybe she had drawn it into being. Maybe that picture gave him a reason to try again, to become that man. Even just for a little while. That night, I read through Mom's old journals again. There was one entry I hadn't seen before. "If he can't be the father our son needs, maybe our son will grow up and show him how." I closed the journal and sat in the quiet, and I realized that's exactly what had happened. We talk about him now, not with pain, but with memory. Ellie asks questions. Mariah tells her how people can change. I tell her that love is not always soft, but it can be steady when we choose it to be. Sometimes, healing isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just making room for someone who tried too late, but still tried. Have you ever witnessed someone change near the end? Have you ever felt your heart shift, even when you thought it was set in stone? Sometimes, the people we write off surprise us. Sometimes, they come back not as who we wish they were, but as someone better than before. If you've ever had a complicated goodbye, I'd be honored to hear your story. Months passed. We settled back into life without him, not the absence of grief, but the kind of stillness that follows a long storm. Every now and then, something small would remind me of him. The way Ellie chewed the tip of her pencil when she was thinking. The habit I had of rubbing the back of my neck when I was nervous. We inherit more than just our features. One afternoon, we received a letter from the executor of his estate. There wasn't much. A small savings account, the old sedan, and a key. A single, worn key tied to a note that read, "For the storage unit on Willow Street." I couldn't bring myself to throw it all away. The unit was cold and musty. Metal shelves lined the walls. A single folding chair sat in the corner, as if he used to come here just to sit with the past. There were boxes, dozens of them, labeled in his handwriting. E. Elementary school. High school trophies. Mom's recipes. Letters I never sent. I sat down on the floor and opened one marked simply, Father. Inside were books, parenting guides from the 80s, full of underlined passages and scribbled notes in the margins. And at the bottom, a photo of him holding me as a newborn. His expression stunned, terrified, in awe. On the back, he had written, I was scared I wouldn't know how to love you right. I wish I'd let myself learn sooner. I took the box home. Not everything made it to our shelves, but a few things did. His fishing hat now hangs in the garage beside mine. The recipe for my mother's sunflower pie sits in our family cookbook. And one of his letters, the only one I read fully, is tucked inside my journal. Son, if you're reading this, you gave me more grace than I deserved. Watching you with Ellie taught me that love isn't loud, it's consistent. Thank you for loving better than I did. You became what I could not. And in doing so, you became my father too. That line stuck with me. You became my father too. It changed how I saw myself, not just as a son who had survived his father, but as a man who had broken the pattern. Ellie's growing up fast now. She's starting to ask harder questions. Like the other night, when she asked me why Grandpa used to be sad. I sat beside her on the edge of her bed, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Because sometimes, I said, people carry sadness for so long, they forget how to put it down. But you helped him remember. She thought for a moment. Is that why he called me magical? I smiled. Exactly. She hugged me, tight. And as she drifted off to sleep, I stayed there a while, hand resting on her back, thinking about how different things could have been if I hadn't met Mariah, if I hadn't let love in, if I had stayed angry. Mariah once told me, forgiveness isn't something you owe people, it's something you give yourself when you're ready to stop bleeding. I think she was right. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop drinking the poison just to spite the person who poured it. I didn't save the house, but I saved my home. And maybe, in a strange way, he saved something too by finally letting go of pride and speaking what needed to be said. The last thing I kept from that storage unit, a worn-out deck of cards. He used to teach me to play rummy at the kitchen table while Mom made tea. He'd let me win sometimes, just enough to make me think I was clever. I brought that deck out last weekend. Ellie and I sat at the dining table. I shuffled the cards, the corners soft from use. Want me to teach you something Grandpa taught me? I asked. She nodded, excited, and so we played, just like he and I once had, only now. The laughter was louder, the love unmistakable, and I realized, this is how healing looks. Not as a single grand moment, but as a quiet legacy passed hand to hand. If you've made it this far, thank you. This wasn't just a story about a father who failed and a son who forgave. It was about the space between, the ache we carry, and what happens when we choose to close the gap, even if only at the very end. Have you ever felt yourself breaking a pattern that once broke you? Have you ever looked at the next generation and thought, this time, it will be different? If so, you're not alone. And if you're still waiting for that final letter, that call, that knock on the door, I hope this story reminds you it's never too late to rewrite what comes next. Please feel free to share your own story, even just a part of it. Someone might need it more than you think. Thank you for listening.